Okay, the Paris Commune of 1871. I'd like to open with a quote by Frederick Engels, looking back on the events that happened. He said, "Well and good, gentlemen, do you want to know what this dictatorship looks like? Look at the Paris Commune. That was the dictatorship of the proletariat." The Paris Commune of 1871 is held as the first assumption of power by the working class. For roughly 2 months, various socialists, including students, teachers, mill workers, and peasants, and virtually everyone in the middle to lower classes, form the most accurate example of what contemporary direct democracy looks like. From March 28th to May 28th, 71, the center of radical thought, Paris, the working class briefly held their ground against a bombardment of surrounding Prussian and French forces. Karl Marx, in retrospect, in his essay, The Civil War in France, said, "The Commune was formed of the municipal councillors, chosen by universal suffrage in the various wards of the town, responsible and revocable at any point. The majority of its members were naturally workers or acknowledged representatives of the working class, and the Commune was to be working, not a parliamentary body, executive and legislative at the same time." But to set the correct political context for everything that was about to happen, the story really begins in July of 1870, where Parisians, right, people from Paris, grew quickly discontented with the French provisional government, with Napoleon III, who was actually the main Napoleon I, the guy that we know a lot about, initiated war with Prussian forces. Napoleon III, thinking Prussia would be weakened at the fear of civil war during its imperialist expansion, was crushed. Prussian troops squashed France's provisional army, and already by September, Paris was under siege. Now, this made the objective conditions ripe for the working class of Paris to take control. During the last few years, the rich became richer, and the poor became poorer. With the combination of embarrassing military failures, food shortages, and the majority of the French provisional government being in the monarchy's hands, the siege from Prussia was a push over the edge. The last straw that was broken was in January, after 4 months of the Prussian sieging Paris. It was when France surrendered and basically said that Prussia could go in and occupy Paris and take control of all of the governing and social organizations. And at this point, the Parisians weren't having it. Hundreds of thousands of citizens belonged to the militia, formerly called the National Guard. And these National Guardsmen elected their own officers and started appointing their own representatives to form a line of defense around Paris. And this is incredibly important because this was the beginning of radical and socialist organizing for what came to be known as the Paris Commune. In spite of the monarchist majority in the French provisional government, they took it one step further. They formed a formal governing and social body. And this is what came to be known as the Central Committee of the National Guard. It would provide elections and proper leadership defending against Prussian forces and a highly possible French restoration. The 92 delegates that consisted the Central Committee was made up of professional doctors, journalists, and political activists. Assuming the authority of all public services, this all happened within a 60-day time span, they passed the following decrees. The first was the separation of church and state. Second was the remission of rents owned for the entire period of the siege, during which payment had been suspended. The abolition of night work in the hundreds of Paris bakeries. The granting of pensions to the unmarried companions and children of National Guards killed on active service. The free return by the city pawn shops of all working men's tools and household items valued up to 20 francs, pledged during the siege. The Commune was concerned that the skilled workers had been forced upon their tools during the war, to survive. the postponement of commercial debts, debt obligations, and abolition of interest on the debts, and lastly, the right of employees to take over and run an enterprise if it was deserted by its owner. The Commune, nonetheless, recognized the previous owner's right to compensation. It's important to note, during this time, churches were not allowed to teach in schools. Education was set up to be almost entirely secular and virtually free. Churches were allowed to practice only at the price of allowing their church houses to become public political meeting houses. At this time, other social movements came into play with feminism, notably, and I'm going to slaughter this name, Nathalie Limel and Elizabeth Dimitrieff, formed what they called the Women's Unions for Defense of Paris and Care of the Injured. The union believed that their fight against unjust patriarchy was innately a class struggle, a fight against global capitalism which defined them as subordinates in society. They called for the replacement of legal prostitution for free and professional education for all women, and they called for equality in the workplace and the right to divorce from their partners. Aside from this pursuit of these higher justices, as Lenin later put it, the formation of military defense was taken when the National Guard, along with women and children of the Commune, claimed cannon that was seated in Paris from the French provisional government. They claimed the cannon on the banner that they paid for them through taxes and through public subscription. So with 400 guns at their disposal, they made for the north and the east part, actually, that's reverse, so the north and the east part of Paris to defend against Prussia. Of course, Prussia's up here and they're coming down, and that's where the siege was going on. So later on April 2nd, not even after a week after the Central Committee was formed, skirmishes with the French government commenced near Versailles, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is just southwest of Paris. While holding off Prussian forces from the east remained fairly stable, French troops from Versailles marched on Paris from the west. And this is, of course, a huge stab at the Commune, because later Marxists and anarchists and socialists of all kinds later look back and they were like, why didn't you go and topple Versailles? Versailles was the hotspot for French forces. Okay. French troops were trained in street fighting. They blew holes in houses and tunneled their way into Paris and easily broke past the Commune arms defense on the west side. So to paint an image, you have the entire east side, which has Prussian forces in the west side. Yeah, is that west for you guys? Yeah, you have, right, Versailles coming up, and they went straight past all the cannon that wasn't there and broke into the houses, blew holes in them, tunneled their way. That's how they broke in. And this is where everything started to fail and fall. Local authorities that developed the electoral organizing were in very little conjunction with the other districts around the city. And power was completely decentralized. There was no mediator of these separate districts and these separate authorities. Once one district was taken over, the rest spilled over in defeat because they could only pay attention to their own survival. And the last week of the Paris Commune, after communards had been slaughtered, literally, is known as La Semaine Sanglante, or the Bloody Week. And executions by the invading French government commenced. The last feudal stances from the communards trickled from May 27th, and finally the city fell on the evening of the 28th of May. An estimated 40,000 communards started the endless march to Versailles for trial and execution. and between Marx and Engels' analysis and contemporary professors, like I stated earlier, the death toll clocked in anywhere between 10 and 50,000. The figures are different according to different sources. I think Marx, I believe it was Marx, said that it rested on 20,000, roughly. So yeah, the first establishment of the very first commune of the workers, by and for the workers, had fallen. Now, my criticism has been epitomized by Lenin, who basically reiterated what Marx and Engels set forth after the commune fell, especially in the split between the First International